Within the confines of his prisoner of war camp, Doug Hegdahl had a more freedom than most. Amazingly, this was because he'd convinced his captors that he was illiterate and posed little threat. Indeed, the North Vietnamese soldiers who held him even called him the incredibly stupid one. But Hegdahl was far from a simpleton, and he'd outsmarted his jailers greatly to the advantage of his fellow prisoners. Douglas Brent Hegdahl III, more commonly known simply as Doug, was born into a Norwegian Lutheran family in September 1946. He attended high school in his hometown of Clark, South Dakota, before enlisting with the U.S. Navy at 20 years of age. Reportedly, Hegdahl enlisted in the Navy in order to travel the world. Indeed, according to military.com, he once told a Navy reporter that he'd never been east of his uncle's Dairy Queen stand in Glenwood, Minnesota, or west of his aunt's house in Phoenix, Arizona. But he was soon to see more of foreign shores than he could possibly have bargained for. As a seaman apprentice, Hegdahl was assigned to the USS Canberra, which had seen active service in the Pacific during World War II. The warship also engaged in 5 missions to Vietnam between 1965 and 1969. During these deployments, her formidable weapons were used as support for U.S. soldiers on the ground. So on April 6, 1967, some 6 months after he joined the Navy, Hegdahl was on night watch duty as the Canberra patrolled the Gulf of Tonkin. This part of the South China Sea lies off the northeastern coast of what was then North Vietnam. Interestingly, the Bay of Tonkin had first become familiar to Americans in 1964. At that time, President Lyndon B. Johnson said North Vietnamese forces had attacked U.S. Navy ships. This was the spark that ultimately dragged the U.S. into the Vietnam War. Indeed, the country first committed ground troops to Vietnam in 1965. But let's get back to April 6, 1967. That night, the USS Canberra was some 3 miles off the North Vietnamese coast and firing her 5-inch guns. So Hegdahl decided that he wanted a better view of the fireworks, but this turned out to be a big mistake. After all, when these heavy naval guns are fired, they cause a powerful shockwave in their immediate surroundings. When he went on deck to watch the guns firing, then, Hegdahl discovered just how powerful these shockwaves could be. Indeed, a blast blew him off the ship and into the sea. Unfortunately, too, it seems that nobody saw this happen, and it was 2 days before the alarm was raised that Hegdahl was missing. Alas, this was far too late for the ship to rescue him from the waters of the Gulf of Tonkin. Hegdahl therefore found himself in the sea with nothing more than the clothes he had been wearing. He was even minus the glasses he wore to correct his short-sightedness. So, as he was 3 miles from the shore, he apparently figured that the only thing for it was to start swimming. Then, as dawn broke, he reportedly thought he saw land and swam in that direction. Eventually, after Hegdahl had spent some 5 hours in the sea, the crew of a Vietnamese fishing boat spotted him. The fishermen then took him ashore and handed him over to Viet Cong militia, who promptly gave him a ferocious beating. So began Hegdahl's life as a prisoner of war. Hegdahl was subsequently taken to the infamous Ho Lo prison in the North Vietnamese capital of Hanoi. This prison became better known by the ironic nickname the American prisoners held there gave it, the Hanoi Hilton. It was also a byword for the ill treatment of American POWs. While a resident at the Hanoi Hilton, Hegdahl was subjected to intense interrogation by the disbelieving North Vietnamese. It seems that they found his story that he'd fallen off a U.S. warship by accident completely implausible. Unbeknownst to his captors, though, Hegdahl struck up a firm friendship with his cellmate, Lieutenant Commander Richard A. Stratton. Stratton was a pilot who had been captured just a few months earlier after parachuting from his stricken A-4 Skyhawk. The story of Stratton's capture was both unfortunate and extraordinary. On January 5, 1967, Stratton had been on a mission to bomb a ferry and so had released one of the missiles suspended beneath the wing of his plane. After the moment of release, the rocket should have blasted off to its target. But this time it had failed to ignite until it was behind Stratton's plane. The missile had then damaged Stratton's engine and forced him to eject. Fortunately, Stratton was the kind of man who could see the funny side to the story of his having destroyed his own plane. So, while staying at the Hanoi Hilton, Stratton discovered that his young cellmate had some extraordinary talents. For example, Hegdahl could recite the Gettysburg Address backwards. And he had an excellent memory. Therefore, Stratton and others set about passing on details to him about as many American prisoners as they could. These Hegdahl was able to memorize. This was important because the North Vietnamese had never given lists of captured men to the American authorities. Some time later, though, the North Vietnamese planned to release some inmates because they believed it would be a strategic propaganda action. And while the prisoners had made a pact that they would only accept freedom if they were all let go at once, there were obvious advantages to allowing Hegdahl to be released. Still, in the end, Stratton had to give Hegdahl a direct order before he would agree to the release that would separate him from his buddies at the Hanoi Hilton. And on August 5, 1969, Hegdahl was freed after 852 days as a prisoner. In his head, he held the details of 256 American prisoners, memorized to the tune of Old MacDonald Had a Farm. Hegdahl subsequently took his invaluable information back to the authorities. And he even confronted the North Vietnamese negotiators at the 1970 peace talks in Paris with the truth about their treatment of prisoners. So the incredibly stupid one turned out to have been a whole lot smarter than his captors could ever have dreamed.